Hi everyone, I'm going to be presenting one of my data chapters of my PhD today. So looking at cross-national analysis of the UK and Australian engineering skill systems and the role of aerospace multinationals in both countries in engaging with universities. So just a little bit of the rationale behind my PhD project. So it kind of ties into some of the discussions yesterday where there's this talk at a policy level. A lot of governments are talking about the importance of skills and human capital in maintaining sort of economic development. And in the UK, we saw in around 2013, 2014, the launching of the industrial strategy and a shift in the government's approach to dealing with high-skill sectors like aerospace. Now, the sector is, I think it's been mentioned in a couple of presentations, dominated by multinationals. And so when I started to look at the research that had been done previously, while there's quite a significant body of research on the role of multinational firms, there's not a huge amount on their role in shaping skill development. So, this is quite a busy slide, but I'm going to try and keep my focus on the slide to a minimum. So, the key things I'm drawing on from the literature are from the National Business System literature, the idea that in countries like the UK and Australia, which are usually liberal market or Anglophone countries, that the skill systems are reliant on universities for the generation of high levels of skill, and these skill systems are coordinated primarily by the market. So the reason that's important is employers flag demand for certain skills. There's often a gap or a delay for universities responding to that demand, so you end up with situations like skill shortages or skill mismatches. In the multinational literature then, there's obviously quite a large body of research which talks about how these firms are able to shape subnational conditions to better suit their needs. So there's stuff on subnational variations with varieties of capitalism literature. There's obviously the institutional experimentation literature. There's the concept of institutional entrepreneurs and multinationals themselves as boundary spanners. There's one study that looks at the role of multinationals in shaping vocational education and training, which was by Jurgens and Krodinsky. That was a study looking at two automotive multinationals in the BRICS economies and how they shaped or had particular approaches to trade skills and generating the trade skills that they needed. And in addition, we know that firms do engage with universities in the UK and Australia. So there's stuff in the innovation literature about innovation partnerships and the use of risk sharing, and in the employability literature in relation to the outcomes and whether employer engagement with universities results in higher levels of employability for students. But that literature doesn't really look at the process of how these firms engage and whether they're actually shaping the curriculum or the actual process of skill development. So, my presentation today is going to explore the two cases together because there was a significant similarity in how these firms engaged across the countries. My research focuses on the role of professional engineers, so university level training or so graduates or above, and I spoke to 6 multinationals but 7 subsidiaries. So Defence Organ, both the UK and Australia, Wings Corp and Flight Limited, who are aircraft manufacturers, one in each country, Software Limited and Systems Corp are both software systems manufacturers developing products for air traffic management, and Engines Limited, who is an engines manufacturer. So really original names. Okay, so the first thing that my research, my interviews turned up was that there is engagement between these firms. So every single subsidiary that I spoke to had some kind of relationship with universities, a handful of universities in each country. But the interesting thing was none of these firms seemed to report a skill shortage. So none of them talked about difficulties recruiting graduates. They all seem to have, highly subscribed graduate schemes. And when I started speaking, as part of my research, I was speaking to skills experts, unions, trade associations, a broader kind of group in the skills system as well. There was quite a lot of skepticism particularly in the UK context where there was a lot of discourse about shortage of engineers, a lot of these stakeholders had a kind of sceptical attitude as to how big this shortage actually was. Instead, what seemed to emerge was the fact that these firms are engaging for recruitment, but they're engaging for recruitment in relation to their emerging skill needs. And I guess this ties in with the last presentation where they're talking about the role of composites, the role of advanced manufacturing, the changing nature of work. And so all of these firms had or tended to have large R&T close to commercial readiness projects at universities where they're risk sharing and innovation, and they have built skills components with those universities on top of these innovation relationships. And then the quote there from Engines Limited talks about they've got a university network they manage from headquarters. They were talking about one university which was a specialist in advanced manufacturing systems, Industry 4.0, automation, and how they would then build relationships with that university, with the academics at the research centre, and then they would seek to recruit manufacturing engineering specialists from that university. So the multinationals are engaging, that I spoke to. So then the question was, do they shape skill development? And the answer is quite a strong yes, in several ways. So 6 of the subsidiaries out of the 7 that I spoke to played or had some form of feedback mechanism to discuss the curriculum of engineering undergraduate courses with academics. So these can be informal, so particularly in Victoria, there was a lot of examples of managers, senior managers from these subsidiaries meeting with the academic responsible for designing the curriculum for the engineering undergraduate for aerospace and kind of feeding back, kind of like you to focus more on these areas rather than these areas. In both countries, these managers also sit on advisory and steering boards for these research groups. For the projects that they're funding, they sit on industry advisory boards. So in the UK, there was more of a tendency for these firms to use those formal mechanisms to feedback to academics to say, well, we're kind of forecasting that we're going to need more composite, focus in this area of composites rather than others. When I spoke to some of the universities that had these kind of relationships with several of the firms, the academics kind of talked about the benefits for their students. So it was seen to improve employability, it was seen to make sure that your course was up to date, it was more targeted to what the industry wanted, and so it was seen as a really positive thing. But again, kind of, there's this issue then that raised the question that you picked up about. These large firms dominate the sector, so these courses and these universities are being tailored to their needs, but that does raise questions about the skill needs of the SMEs in the sector and whether this tailoring process actually is benefiting the sector as a whole or just these individual firms. So, in addition to kind of having a direct impact on the curriculum of these courses, 5 of the multinational subsidiaries delivered lectures. So they'd go in, they would deliver a lecture on, in this case, formal methods or high integrity software, so how do you build software in a sector where if you're building a program that's tracking planes in the sky, you can't crash, it can't freeze, it has to be, there's a high level of risk involved. But they will go in and they'll talk about an area of specialism for them. They provide some basic firm-specific knowledge about what they do and how they use the theoretical knowledge these students are learning. And they also use it as a way of raising their profile with these students. So, if you're not Airbus or Boeing, it's kind of useful sometimes for the students to have an idea of what you do so they can kind of get a sense that they might be interested in applying to work for you. All of the 7 subsidiaries run some form of quite intensive internship schemes at these universities. In one case, one of them ran 3 different internship schemes, so 6-week placements in the summer, 1-year placement midway through the course, 3-month placements towards the end of the course. And when I was speaking to engineers, they'd often kind of report having gone through this process and then being kind of recruited once they finished their undergraduate. So by that point, they've already maybe got anywhere from 6 weeks to a year and a half's worth of experience working at the multinational. And the final way that these firms attempted to shape skill development was through the research they funded the universities. So one of the big things was these big commercially ready or big applied research projects. The multinationals will often allow the universities to let master students work on them for their final end of year or end of course project. PhD students are also assigned to these big research projects. So in these instances, the firm will kind of give one of their, either their research and design engineers, or they give one of their managers as an industry supervisor. And the idea with that, particularly for PhDs, is to really make sure, you know, they really play quite a significant role in tailoring or supporting the tailoring of the PhD research. For the master's students, it's often to keep an eye out for promising students as a form of recruitment. Wing Scoring in Australia was kind of saying how they would often target the funding initially at a certain professor, and then they use that sort of wider network of PhDs and postdocs as a way of recruiting like highly specialised STEM workers. So they're working on a project for the firm, it's something the firm's interested in, it's close to commercial readiness, so they're going to be looking to expand their recruitment in that area, and then they're obviously able to through these networks. And the final thing that emerged through this process was that 4 of the subsidiaries actually talked about using these universities then, but they have these kind of very close relationships that are often managed at headquarters level, interestingly, to upskill their existing workforce, right? So usually in areas of innovation, and these kind of activities included things like academics from research centres going to multinational subsidiaries to talk about and give lectures on composites, as an example. Things like the firm being able to go in and meet with one of the academics and say, can you design us a training program? So Engines Limited talked about changing its entire approach to contracting training for its existing workforce and using the universities it has this relationship with. And rather than saying, oh, we'd be interested in seeing what courses you have available, the training director would say, well, we'll go in and we'll say, this is what we need, can you deliver it? And on top of that, using sort of, PhDs for research and design engineers, or masters or MBAs, that kind of thing. Okay. So in conclusion, my research is indicating that there is engagement between some of the aerospace firms I've studied and the universities, and that engagement has a tendency towards firm-specific skills, and the potential for narrowing of course content at these universities, potentially. But the firms themselves seem to embed themselves within this very small number of universities on a number of levels. So, politically and managerially through engaging with these research centres, financially through funding bursaries, scholarships, large research projects, and so obviously this mixture of innovation skills-based activities form quite a strong relationship which the firm then uses to shape skill development and recruit engineering graduates, postgraduates and PhDs. So the question I'm asking is this a case of institutional entrepreneurialism or experimentation? Because in both the UK and the Victorian case, these firms appear to be creating small pockets of employer-led, demand-based skill development within a broader market-coordinated system. Thank you.